lost without it. Without this, we are lost. First thing that's going to pop into most people's minds is going to be grace, and that is correct. Without the love of God, we are lost. Without loving one another, we are lost. Without loving God, we are lost. Upon his departure from the world, Jesus made provisions to carry on his work, the church. It was bound together by three things: faith in him as the Son of God, Matthew 16, 16 through 18, love for one another, John 13 and 34, a benevolent effort for the world's salvation, Matthew 5:16. He laid the most stress on the second of these, and you can see this throughout his teaching: love for one another. Turn to John 13. We're going to read verses 31 through 34. John 13, starting in verse 31. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once. Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you." Am I in the right verse? Okay, here we go. "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love one for another." The reason he says this is a new commandment is because the old commandment is what he's answered the young man that asked him, what is the greatest commandment? The greatest commandment was said to be, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second is like to this: you should love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus is not saying you should love your neighbor as yourself. He says, I'm giving you a new commandment. You should love each other as I have loved you. What I want to look at today is how does that love look? And this is going to be a discussion. We're going to try to keep it as short as possible so we can try to get to everything. But if we don't get to everything, I'll just ask for an opportunity to finish this some other time. But I do want to look very specifically at what it means to love each other. He was talking to the disciples, that would be us, what it means to love each other as he loved us. There's 4 types of love in the Greek. This is all probably a review. This is the beginning stages of study. But does anybody know what the 4 stages or the 4 types of love in the Greek are? Russ? I heard it up here. Somebody up here said it. Storge. Storge is a love between family. It's a familial love. Between a parent and child, between siblings. It is a bond that is natural. It is an emotional love. Eros, obviously, is the love between a man and a woman, husband and a wife. This is also an emotional feeling. Phileo, friendship. That's the way the word is described. You've got the city of brotherly love. It's brotherly love. But Philadelphia is named after it. But phileo is a friendship type of love. You have things in common. You like each other. That's the kind of love that they're talking about there. It's also an emotional love. But agape, which is called the greatest of all of them, is not an emotional love. It is an act of will. What does it look like? Our text this morning is going to be, if you want to go ahead and turn there and put your markers there, 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 7. I found it interesting that one of the commentaries, Stephen Cole is the commentator, concerning verses 4 through 7, points out that most of the words used to show love's characteristics in verses 4 through 7, in the English, they're predicate adjectives. Now, not an English major, so if there happens to be an English teacher in here, explain what a predicate adjective is. Nobody. But I do know that, okay. Okay. So most of the words used in there to describe love are predicate adjectives. He said, but the interesting thing is that in the Greek, most of those words are verbs. So agape is not an emotion. It's not a feeling. It's an action. To love someone. You're doing something. Love is action. The Greek word agape is action. 1 John 3, verse 18. If somebody gets there first, you can read that for me if you would. 1 John 3, verse 18. You can see John had seen a lot of I love you, I love you, I love you. He wasn't seeing the action, so he was reminding them agape love is an action. The reason I want to spend some time talking about how are we to love one another. Jesus already told us how we're to love one another. He said it in the new commandment that he gave to us. We are to love each other, brothers and sisters, as he loved us. Self-sacrificial, giving, action, love. Because remember, we want to evangelize. This is how the world is going to know who we are. You look at the in John 13, you look at that verse, it says, by this they, who's they? The world. Everybody outside of the church. By this they will know that you are my disciples. You've heard me talk a lot of times about, well, not a lot of times, you've only heard me, well, no, if you've listened to me privately, you've heard me talk about it, but letting our light shine is so critical out there in the dark world. How do we do that? What is that light? That's why we let our light shine. We don't shine our light. How do we let our light? What is the light that we're talking about? Anybody? The light is our actions. True. Anybody else? I heard it back in the back. That's the light that we're talking about. The love of God shining through us. The love of Christ shining through us. It's not our light. We're letting the light of Christ shine through us. And it's that love that we're letting shine. So we need to be focused on how do we love one another. Starting in verse 1, we want to set the context up. Verses 4 through 7 is the main context, or the main passage, but I want to set the context up. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I have nothing. If I give away all I have and deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast, is not arrogant or rude, does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoings, but rejoices in truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. So the first one, love is patient. We are told that we are to love each other as Jesus loved us. How was patience reflected in the life of Christ? And remember now, this is an open discussion. Yeah, Peter was his perfect example of his patience. Was always jumping the gun, and Jesus was so patient with him. The Greek word for this particular word here, it comes from it. The Greek word is two words basically, translated long-tempered. That's the way it translates literally from the Greek. So, not short-tempered, but long-tempered. What are some ways that we can reflect that love, that reflection of love in the body? And be specific. We're going to talk, I want one or two from whoever they come from. For, absolutely. We'll get to the one of these that I think is probably. And we all know that person. We all know that person. We know that person that they'll come to church and they'll go to church every time the doors are open. But when it comes to obeying the gospel, we just and what he's saying here is love one another. Do not give up on that person. Love is kind. Turn to Luke 6. Verse 33. We'll start in verse 32. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. Skip down to verse 35. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. The Greek word here that is used in the passage in Second Corinthians says love is kind. The Greek word is actually, the word is useful, literal translation. So, obviously we know how that was reflected in the life of Christ. Look, in John 13, he washes the apostles' feet. He was a servant. He said, he's humbled himself. Did as a servant would, and he washed their feet. How can we be useful? Specific. How can we reflect the kindness of love that he's talking about with one another? And you'll see why I keep bringing that just to us when we get to the end here. We'll tie it all together. We're supposed to love everybody, but I want to talk about how we love one another right now. Because we are the city set on a hill. All right, remember, love's an action. So she said that in your deeds, or being constantly aware And that's exactly the point that I was getting to. Are we always aware of what our brothers and sisters need? We try to make ourselves aware of what our brothers and sisters need, what the eldership needs, volunteers, to do the work. You heard me say the last time I stood in front of you, this lesson's not at you. This one was written at me. So I'm asking all of us to look at what I've looked at for 6 hours. Why should I be the only one that's convicted? Huh. Do I spend enough time making myself aware of what the needs are with my brothers and sisters? Think about that. Yes. You're jumping ahead of me. We're going to get to that one. That's a good point. You're getting ahead of me. No, you're fine. That's the. You know how many times I've heard that preached by my grandfather. By not letting others help us, we're robbing them of their opportunity of service. And I'm guilty of it. No, I'm fine. I don't need any help. I don't need any help. I don't need any help. How do we grow closer if we don't let somebody else in to help? Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? Where's mine? Is mine here? Sometimes we don't communicate well enough with even our own brothers and sisters. And that's just a poke. I'm only kidding. Tammy, you are here somewhere. But yes, we have to allow our family members in. That's the only way that we're going to go closer. That love cannot grow in us if it's not reflecting these qualities. Kindness, usefulness is one of those qualities. To cheat my brother and sister out of an opportunity to do that, I'm almost as guilty as if they just didn't do it at all by not allowing them in. Also in verse 4 it says, love is not jealous. In the Greek, I looked up the Greek translation of all these words because I wanted to see how they literally translate. Because if you look at the different translations, you'll find this word's translated a lot of different ways. But in the Greek, that word is akin to the same word that they use for greed. So, in other words, we're overzealously longing for something that someone else has, or we're worried about it. Charity envieth not. Envy, jealousy. Again, that Greek is from. And charity is another great way to translate this word. I think that's the better way to translate this word, because charity is an act of will. We think of love and we think of the emotion. That's the first thing we go to, is that, finding someone and falling in love, and it comes from the heart. The love we're talking about is an act of will. It's not an act of emotion. Otherwise, he wouldn't have told me to love my enemies. How am I going to have an emotional response to somebody that is out to harm me. He's not asking me to have an emotional response. He's not asking me to love them that way. He's asking me to think of their greater good and to do everything I can to produce that in them. How was that reflected in the life of Christ? Love is not jealous. How was that reflected in Jesus' life? I've thought of one way. I want to see if anybody else can come up with it. Let's go there and look at it. Philippians 2 and verse. Go ahead and read it for me. Yeah, that's a fantastic example. Look at Matthew 8 and verse 20. Hope I wrote that down right. Yes. And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." So all around him, he's seeing people that have and have and have, and he does not have. He emptied himself and left heaven, has nothing. There's no jealousy there. Turn to James 4. Look at verse 2. You desire and do not have, so you murder. Covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. Used that passage before for prayer, but they were fighting over spiritual gifts. They were fighting, well, he has this, and I want that. James tells them, you're quarreling over things. All you have to do is ask. So there's one way that we can avoid jealousy in the body. Is if we see something that we want, ask God for it. Don't covet it in somebody else. You have not because you ask not. Jealousy is probably one of the most destructive emotions that we can possibly display. It is the absolute antithesis of what this love we're talking about is. I mean, we all have examples from our lives that we can what jealousy has done. So how can we reflect that type of love, the love that is not jealous? How can we reflect that one with another to strengthen the body? Specifically, does anybody got any ideas on how something specific actions we can use to not do that? Perfect. Absolutely. Encouragement was what I was thinking of, and both of you said it exactly. But that's how we can not be jealous of one another. We can encourage one another. Encouragement is going to stave off that jealousy. If I tell you I'm so happy for what you've accomplished, it's going to be really hard for me to be jealous of that, isn't it? Well, we're going to assume honesty with ourselves before we move forward. I'm just going to assume that we are looking in the mirror and being self-aware. Love is not arrogant. Love does not brag. The Greek word for this actually is the way that it is translated in the King James Version. The Greek word there means puffed up. And in the King James Version, that is the way that this is translated. Is not love is not puffed up. My great grandmother used to talk about he walked around like a little banty rooster, and I don't know how many of you know it. Yeah, I hear giggles. But with your chest puffed out, strut around. She used to tell me not to do that from time to time. Quit walking around here like a little banty rooster. How is this reflected in the life of Christ? Love is not puffed up. Back to the verse that Brother read just a minute ago in, is that Philippians 2? He humbled himself, took on the form of a man, became a servant. In John chapter 13, he washed the apostles' feet. What other ways is love is not puffed up? What other ways can somebody think of that was reflected in the life of Christ? That's right. That's what I was going. That was one of the things I had written down here. I was going to ask: does anybody remember a single time that Jesus, after he did something or performed a miracle, told everybody what a great miracle that was? And yes, he said, do not talk about this. That's right. That's a very, very good point. So, how can love is not puffed up? How can we specific actions that we can take to reflect that in our lives, that kind of love in the body of Christ? Anybody? While you're it's Matthew 6. Well, it's not the exact verse, but Matthew 6 and verse 1 is saying the exact same thing. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. So, if it's a reward you're looking for, which reward do you want? If I remind everybody of the things that I've done, if I shine my light, not let my light shine, if I shine my light, I'm going to get my reward right away. You're going to get your reward. People are going to go, oh, isn't that great? Look at what he did. That's fantastic. God does reward us pretty quickly, but we've got a much greater reward coming down the line. Look, I never saw my grandpa. Yeah, I never saw my grandfather want for anything. He put God first in his life. I don't know how many of you know E.A. Furline. I know one does, but never once did I see him wanting for anything. Something would always happen. God always took care of him. He believed beyond a shadow of a doubt, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you. He believed that, and I saw it in his life. Things would be tough. Money would be tough. For some reason, a check would show up in his mailbox from somebody that he hadn't spoken to in 15 years. We know where that check came from. God's providence put that check there. Absolutely. You if you keep that quiet, just let it sit in here, that reward's greater than the praise of men anyway. I've had several people say, I don't know why you gave that bum money. Why'd you give that bum money? He's just going to go, I don't care what he spends it on. I didn't do it for him. I did it because God says, if you don't take care of the least of these, I am the least of these. You're doing it for them, you're doing it for me. If you're not doing it for them, you wouldn't have done it for me. That's not who, I'm not giving that money to him. I'm giving that money from me. So, and if we can't do that right here in the body, we can't give of ourselves to one another right here in the body, how are we going to do it out there? How are they going to know who we are out there? Remember, love is not arrogant. Love does not brag. It is not puffed up. Love is not rude. The Greek translation means to needlessly offend. Love does not needlessly offend. Or good manners, courtesy. Is another way that word was translated from it can be translated from the Greek. How was that reflected in the life of Jesus? That's a tricky one, isn't it? Because we're talking about the Son of God. We're talking about authority. We're talking about the ultimate authority. The beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So was Jesus always polite in his teaching? No, he was not. He was not. It wasn't dripping with kindness, his message to them. Huh? Not always. Yeah, he got after them all right. But remember, we're talking about somebody that spoke with an authority that we do not have. That was God in the flesh. But was he courteous? Was he polite? Was he well-mannered? Did he needlessly offend people? Correct. Look at how he dealt with Peter on a number of occasions. He didn't say, Peter, don't be stupid. And he could have. He probably wanted to. Don't tell me that the human side of Jesus didn't want to say, Peter, are you kidding me? How many times do we have to talk about this? But he didn't do that. The point that she made is exactly the point that I want to make here. Love is not rude does not mean that we are supposed to be soft on the truth. Look, I know my parents loved me. I know that they wanted my best interest. I think this is where the word gets far too convoluted nowadays. In parenting, in society, I want to talk about just love them. Just love them. Just love them. Well, if I just love them, maybe a switch is the kind of love that they need at that point. I know my mother and my father. I know for a fact that there was plenty of familial love there. They loved me as anybody loves a child. They loved me in a agape type of selfless love. Did they always like me? I doubt it. I wouldn't have. well, they loved me. They wanted what was best for me, but some of the things I did would have made them not like me, not just the action. But I wasn't the best kid in the world, but I always knew. Well, I don't want to say I always knew because I thought they were horrible until I hit about 25 and realized that if I'd have listened to them, half of the problems that I had would not have happened. And all of us that are parents can relate to that. You are dumb as a hammer until they're about 25 years old, and then you're the smartest people they've ever met. But love is not rude. I want to nitpick a little bit, just to try to drive the point home. Courtesy. I'm just going to throw this out there. You guys can do with it what you want. I've been in congregations, I've been in buildings where that's John's seat. Do not sit in John's seat. That's nitpicking a little bit, but what would love do there? That's correct. Love would just go quietly and sit somewhere else. I'm nitpicking, so please don't think that I'm up here telling everybody that they're on a fast track to the lake of fire because they wanted to sit where they normally sit. That's not what I'm saying. Talking about the introspection, talking about the looking in the mirror. Love is not rude. Love is courteous. And if we can't do it in here, how are we going to do it out there? Yes. And what did she do there? This is a perfect teaching opportunity. Yeah. Oh, you are absolutely right on the money there. I've had that very self same experience, and I was like, I just seen you go ahead and spank me, but I'm disappointed in you is awful. That's a great point. Yeah, that's an opportunity to get closer to a brother and sister that we might not be close enough to. Love does not seek its own. Literally translated, selfish or self-absorbed, the me generation. One commentator wrote, and I thought this was the best thing I'd ever heard. Cure selfishness, and you plant a Garden of Eden. It's really just that simple. You cure selfishness, you plant a Garden of Eden. People were not concerned. If people were more concerned with someone else rather than themselves, imagine what this world could be like. So we have to do that in here so that this lighthouse in this dark world is shining out there, the love of Jesus. So it has to be done in here. There's one point that I want to get to, so we're going to skip that one. But but I definitely want to get to this one because this is the one that I think is probably the most divisive thing that tears the Lord's church up the most. Love is not provoked. The Greek word here is to sharpen, to stimulate, to rouse to anger. Love is not provoked. Now we know what provoking means, and we know we shouldn't do that. Love should not provoke nor be provoked. But what does he mean, love is not provoked? Anybody? Right? Touchy is the word, the way that the Greek word there can actually be translated. Love is not touchy. You want to talk about stepping on toes? The whole time I'm looking into this one, it really hurt. My feet are killing me. Because we've always heard that we are to admonish or to rebuke in love. Right? Everybody knows that. And touchy people will be really quick to point out that it's supposed to be done in love. But how's it supposed to be received? In the same fashion, guys, the same fashion. I'm guilty of it, but it's the thing that divides the church more than anything that I've ever seen in my life. I got offended because somebody was trying to let me know that they thought I was wrong. I'm going to go somewhere else. That's right. We're not hating.